The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a Black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
He is a graduate student of opera at Northwestern University, a young man with a full scholarship. But there is one song he is refusing to sing. Lourdes Duarte is in our newsroom with the story.
Yeah, he sure is. We're talking about a 25-year-old graduate student, as you mentioned, says he's willing to do even extra credit if that's what it takes, but he just does not want to perform the work of a poet considered by many to be offensive and racist. The university threatening to fail him if he doesn't comply. The battle has led the student to make his own threats as well, promising not to drop the issue until he sees a positive resolution. Hard not to notice Timothy McNair's booming voice, a music master's student at Northwestern University who says this time his voice isn't being heard at all.
I was extremely angry, and you know, I still am.
As part of his music class, he is required to perform at a June 8th concert. He's performed plenty of times before. Here he is at a concert series in Bavaria. But this time, it is different. He would have to perform 3 songs. One of them contains the writings of this man, American poet Walt Whitman,
whom we know is one of the most historically racist poets of U.S. history, and there were all sorts of interesting things that he said, of which he's called African Americans baboons, and was for oppressing voting rights.
Although some may disagree with him, Timothy feels pretty strongly about it. He says he researched Whitman for a sociology class, and even though the Whitman poem he's being asked to perform doesn't contain any blatant racism, he's insulted by the writer and some of his other work. Here's an email Timothy says he exchanged with his music professor, Dr. Nally. His response is what he can't get over: either perform all the selections or be banned from class and receive a failing grade.
Certainly, I do not deserve to fail this class. I've made an A in this class for the past 2 quarters. I have over a 3.7 GPA. I'm an officer on 2 committees at this university. So what is deserving of the situation for me is to be able to perform 2 pieces and not the third. To even have the third piece removed because of the insensitivity.
But right now, it doesn't look like that will happen. The school sending out this statement, quote, Northwestern University does not comment on academic issues regarding individual students. However, the university's expectation of all students is that they complete work assigned by their professors. He is filing a complaint with the NAACP. Just today, by the way, he received another email from his professor letting him know that if he wishes to perform all of the songs, he has to return to class by tomorrow. Timothy does not plan to do so, though. We did reach out to that professor, but no comment from him tonight.
Wow.
Bill.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Wednesday, August 1, 2018. So I have been told. Walt Whitman. Wow. You can think of this as a retrospective of the context of white supremacy. In some ways, we're slowly encroaching on our 10-year anniversary. So this is most definitely, as the description says, the tackiness of yoga teacher training. Absolutely. This is also, I've said that consistently. A listener, investor, asked if the whole yoga odyssey since the beginning of the year, basically, if that's been a spiritual experience for Gus T. what a question. And looking back on it, I said I will have to ponder. I'll have to think on it, given everything that has transpired. One aspect, since I've been thinking about that question, there has been such tremendous overlap, at least in my opinion. You all can, give your thoughts. I've talked a lot about my yoga experience over the last 7 months at this point. There's been a lot of overlap between the work of counter racism that I've been engaged in and what I hear, what I experience, things that I see in the yoga practice. Lots of overlap between the two. That'll be the case in today's broadcast, and folks can comment. But that might be quote unquote some element of some spiritual element to the whole practice. But I'll have to give that more thought. If listeners, if you have any thoughts, if there's been any noticeable changes that you've picked up since I have been practicing, feel free to share as well, since I've been running my mouth about the yoga thing for a long time. If you've noticed anything that has seemingly changed since I've been practicing 7 months now, feel free to share. Before I get to the tackiness and white terrorism on the yoga mat, first of all, one of the links that I've been using for about a decade, the tiny.cc/RWSWJ. I think racists have just reported it as spam, and they are not allowing me to post it on Facebook and Twitter. I have other tinies. I've been using that old shortener account for about a decade. But I think that's just racist interference. I wrote the folks to see, if there's any recourse to get the problem rectified. I've not heard back from them, but that's the problem. If that is the link that you shared, just be aware that that is the problem. You can go directly to the website at Black Talk Radio Network. I've been posting that link on Twitter, Facebook, other sites. You can, feel free. People that have emailed me about problems with the tiny.cc link, I have, let them know and what have you. But that is the issue. I suspect it's just general racist interference. Next, the archives, as I said, or in fact, one of the sites that hosts their archives, they just updated their site. So I think some people were using the old address and it doesn't redirect you. It was just showing an error on the page. It doesn't redirect you to the new site where the archives are, and they still work and everything. It's all functional. And as people have emailed me, I've directed them to the new archive site. If you access the content at iTunes or Black Talk Radio Network or wherever else online, then it is not an issue. I don't think this is the main place that people access the archives, but if you are having any issues accessing the content, if the page is not loading for the site where you go to get the archives, just drop me an email and I can redirect you to the new site. No problem. They just updated their website. Again, some of the older archives might not be working, or I know they're not working, and I'm working to restore those. Again, we're talking hundreds of programs, 10 years of effort. But the most recent content should all be working. When I say most recent, pretty much everything 2015 forward should be working correctly in the archives, iTunes, wherever you happen to download. If you have a problem with the archives, drop us an email. Barracoon, Zora Neale Hurston. That is the next book for the book club. Princess and quite a few other listeners requested that book. It just came out this year, even though it is a posthumous publication. This is apparently a book that she wrote, Zora Neale Hurston, way before she was famous. Their Eyes Were Watching God and all of that, big time writer. But it's supposed to be very, very good. I have not read it yet. As I said, it just came out this year. We should be starting it Friday. If we have any listeners, if you would like to give an assist, I forgot to make an effort to obtain the audiobook earlier. I thought we were going to be reading Invisible Man until much later. I thought Invisible Man would take us an additional 3, maybe even 4 weeks, and we finished it so quickly that it arrived and I don't even have the audiobook. So I put it on my wish list. If any folks are so inclined, wonderful. Thanks for the help. Either way, that is the book we are doing. Starting this Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. I'm excited because it has gotten a lot of great reviews, and I have read some of Zora Neale Hurston's work before. So looking forward, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific this Friday. Alrighty. Yoga. Now, one thing that has stood out as I've been thinking, listeners asking me, all these metaphysical questions about what has changed. One thing that has stuck out to me more so recently, they call it practice, right? They even emphasize that word in class and overlap. I've talked about that. Whites practice racism. Practice, whether in the context of yoga or in the context of white terrorism, practice implies refinement. You are getting better. You are looking for some sort of improvement in what you're doing. Yoga mat? Abusing niggers. Absolutely. Practice. One thing that I've noticed as I have been practicing yoga, even though they invoke the word practice and they'll say that like, this is not a performance, if you stumble in a balanced pose, it's no big deal, it's just practice, whatever. Even though it is supposed to be practice, they count everything. When I say they, I mean whites. They count everything. It is significant, I'll say. I cannot think of too many other activities that are like leisure activities, right? That you just are doing for giggles or whatever, or even if it's exercise, right? Let's say it's exercise. I don't think most exercises, at least not exercises that I participated in, I don't think they have like a count on how many times you have come to, do whatever your activity is. Like I've engaged in a lot of athletic activities in my life. I do not remember going to the gym to lift weights and then making a count like you have lifted weights 10 times this month, or you came to play basketball 8 times this month, or you came to play tennis 9 times. I do not ever remember that for any activity that I've had in my life. They count classes for yoga like meticulously at pretty much every studio that I've been, not pretty much, at every studio that I've been at, they count classes. Because of that, I count classes, and in a myriad of ways, I count classes. That's how I know I've taken over 300 classes this calendar year, and specifically since May 24th, I've taken over 160 classes, May 24th to August 1. And I know this because whites relentlessly count everything. Just that mentality sticks out to me. It's something that's supposed to be spiritual. And a lot of times on the mat, they'll say, we apparently a significant number of C.O.W.S listeners also have practiced or are currently practicing yogis. Phenomenal. We can do that retreat maybe. But they say, it's practice. You do the pose, forget it. If you did well, great, forget it. If you didn't do as well as you wanted, great, forget it. It's practice. That's what they say. I just find that curious, significant, and curious. I'm eager to see if that's the case in other parts of the world. If it's counted, if people go to the studio and they count and have a running chart, you've taken 100 classes and that sort of thing. I bring this up specifically because this past weekend, at the current studio where I'm practicing just for my private practice, I'm at a different studio for my teacher training. At the studio where I'm practicing for fun, private practice, I just took my 100th class maybe 2 weeks ago. They do a celebration. I know this because I was in a class where someone else, it was their 100th class, and they do like a hip hip hooray and photo op and all this other stuff. And they got a car. Anyway, they make like a small production out of this. I was present when this happened, and at the time, I was around class 60. And this is maybe 2 weeks after the suspected racist white man, I told you all, you're constantly under surveillance. He told me, I'd never seen him before. It was the first time I'd taken this class. I came in, he said, oh, I've heard all about you. You've taken like 40 classes in 10 days or something, crazy, which I didn't even know. I wasn't even tracking. Random strangers are tracking and know my yoga class count. Anyway, at this studio, I'd taken my 100th class, and this past weekend on Saturday, I took a morning class with an instructor that I have no rapport with at all. Like, this was the second time I've taken her class ever. I generally do not take her class, and it just happened that day that I ended up being at her class. Anyway, we do our shavasana. That's the stretch, relax at the end of class after you've done all the hard work. We do our shavasana. I'm relaxing. I go to roll over, and she says, the guy over there, Gus in the corner, he might look like he's sleeping, but he has taken 100 classes at the studio. And in fact, he's taken 100 classes in 4 months. Now, I will pause. Not that it matters, system of racism, white supremacy, but this could be an act of racism because she did not get the details right. It seems braggy or something just seems incorrect about that, like pausing to do a whoopee for how many classes you've taken. Anyway, if we are going to do that, then we should do it correctly. It was not in 4 months. Gus took 100 classes in 60 days. I joined on May 24th. I took my 100th class on July 22nd. Either way, even with her incorrect proclamation, she said I set the record for being the fastest person to take 100 classes at their studio, whatever that means in the system of white supremacy. Anyway, so she says, yeah, blah, blah, blah. He's taking all his classes. And it was bizarre to have a room of white women applauding the sole Negro in the room for a seemingly meaningless accomplishment, if you can even call it that. It was just very bizarre, and especially this is, again, an instructor I have no rapport with at all. Second time I've taken her class. So that happened. We finished that. The next day, I have a morning yoga class, and I have teacher training the following day. The morning yoga class, I get there. It is another white woman, stranger, that I have no rapport with. This time a white woman I've never seen in life. Like, I was, ready to leave because I didn't know what was going on. It's normally a male instructor, suspected racist. And at least, I know who this guy is, familiar, nothing. So I'm a little caught off guard and trying to figure out what's going on. She says, oh, I'm a new instructor, blah, blah, blah. She's explaining. She says, the normal white guy who's there, his name is CJ. She says, CJ's not here. And in fact, I'm going to be replacing him permanently for this class. I know that's a bummer. He has those beautiful blue eyes, and you just get to look up at him. And that right there just seems meditative, just to look up and see all that. There were a few swoons in the class, like system of racism, white supremacy. She continues and she says, so today's class that we're going to do, sorry I don't have those beautiful blue eyes to look up at, but today's class that we're going to do is focusing on the 5th chakra. Now, I don't know anything. Let me even make sure I pronounce it correctly as I've been told. It is pronounced chakra. That is the correct pronunciation, even though it is most commonly said chakra. I've been told that is the correct pronunciation is chakra. I don't know anything about the chakras, whatever they're called. I don't know anything about them in terms of anatomy, spiritually, none of that. That gets mentioned frequently in yoga. I have a massive disconnect to all of that because typically it is whites that are doing the talking about all of these concepts, and or it is a super white saturated environment, and it just the hypocrisy of being around all of these race soldiers where I'm just hoping to not be terrorized, accused, kicked, violated in some way. To think that we're going to have some sort of dialogue about serious spiritual matters and how we relate to one another and the planet and the creator. I mean, that is just absurd. Let's just do the postures. And, I don't want to really hear anything about that. That's really been my attitude for the entire time I've been taking these classes. Some places, some studios focus more on that than others. Some instructors focus more on that than others. Anyway, so she says we're doing the fifth chakra. And I get home, I know that teacher training, I have class in a few hours. We're doing a whole 3-hour lecture on chakras. So I look in the manual to see what's the fifth chakra and get more information as to what this all relates to. Now, again, talk about overlap. So the fifth chakra is supposed to be in Sanskrit. The Sanskrit title is Vishuddha. That might not be the correct pronunciation. I am not an expert in Sanskrit. This is the throat chakra. So they say, the manual says the throat chakra located deep in the throat center is the seat of communication and truth. In order to speak our truth, I hate that phrasing, we must first understand what really matters to us. An honest, masterful relationship with the self is essential for awakening this chakra. When healthy, we are able to say what we mean and are able to accurately bring teachings to others. Finding balance may involve overcoming feelings of shyness, self-consciousness, or paring down words so that they are more concise and to the point. Often we resort to cynicism and sarcasm as ways to avoid being truthful, pitfalls to avoid. When the fifth chakra is in balance, ever written something and amazed yourself with just how wise you are? Ever had a conversation and felt like you truly connected on a deeper level? Has someone ever surprised you with how well they listened and how much your words matter? This happens quite a bit as teachers, and we are not always aware of the weight of our cues. You are not only able to speak words, you are able to translate feeling, sensation, emotion, and compassion through your voice, your touch, your gaze, or any other means of communicating. You are confident in your ideas and can back them up. You mean what you say and say what you mean. Your intentions are clear to many different types of people, and you are able to make conscious choices about the best way to present information. You accept that everything happens for a reason, and you have faith that what you express is right and good. Now, a lot of that is verbiage that I would not use, but the general sense of it, I said, this has some resonance with Gus T for a variety of reasons. Someone, as myself being a journalist, the postures, lots lined up with this one. Even the postures, I won't go into those, but the postures that you would do to open your fifth chakra are generally postures that I am very strong. So lots of this resonated. So I'm reading all of this information like, oh, wow, this is so interesting. Can't wait to get to class. I keep reading further down on the page, and they have different quotes, like for all of the chakras, to help you further think about these concepts and what all this means. So I go down the page, and they have a quote from none other than Walt Whitman. As I said, the alignment between my yoga practice and the counter-racist work that I've done here at the C.O.W.S and elsewhere, the symmetry has been a lot on a regular basis. So the quote that they have from Walt Whitman, "What is that you express in your eyes? Question. It seems to me more than all the print I have read in my life." Now you can ponder on that. If that helped you get some greater depth about chakras and what have you, then whoopee. But I immediately thought of Mr. Timothy McNair. Whoop, 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 whoop. I did think of Timothy McNair, but concurrently with Timothy McNair, anytime that I hear Walt Whitman, there is no way I might have had my Los Pollos Hermanos hat on when I read this, but if I didn't have it on, it was very close, arm's reach. Anytime I hear Walt Whitman, I think of Mr. Timothy McNair, former guest on the Cows, and I also think of Breaking Bad. I will pause for the recital again. Breaking Bad, we did 2 episodes here at the Cows. You can go back in the archives and check it out. I think it is well done white supremacist cinema. You are following the White family. And just put that in context, we're in the middle of what they call the so-called opioid epidemic. Put that in quotes. To be in the middle of that where they're crying every day and hand-wringing about whites dying and overdosing, and one of the most popular television shows of all time just went off the air 5 years ago, Breaking Bad, about the White family and their methamphetamine empire. Anyway, that's the show that I think of when I hear Walt Whitman, because they make Walt Whitman not just a one-time recital. Walt Whitman is essential to the plot of Breaking Bad, over 5 seasons essential to the plot of Breaking Bad. But to make sure that, they emphasize the importance of Whitman, they have a recital in the middle of season 3. This is Breaking Bad giving Walt Whitman his due. Context of White Supremacy.
And all the while, I kept thinking about that great old Whitman poem. When I heard The Learned Astronomer.
I don't know it.
Oh, anyway.
Well, can you recite it?
Pathetically enough, I could.
All right, well.
Oh.
No, come on. Come on.
When I heard The Learned Astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and the diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured, with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. Yes, I am a nerd.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Context of white supremacy. And be clear, that conversation was not taking place in a library, in a field, next to a pond. That conversation was taking place in a meth laboratory. They are in yellow suits, protective hazmat gear because of all the toxins and fumes that their poisonous product produces. But yes, in a meth lab, super meth lab, if you will, they pause for a Walt Whitman recital. Racism through and through. And again, that right there, in my view, is reinforcing racism, white supremacy, because of who Walt Whitman is and just everything about the structure of the show. We talked about this multiple times when we talked about Breaking Bad back in 2013. When I hear Walt Whitman and put in context knowing more about him, why do I know so much information about Walt Whitman? I played the sound clip at the beginning of the program. Mr. Timothy McNair, he was a guest on the program in 2013. Sometimes it is even good for Gus T. Like, it's been 10 years to remember all of the guests. I think Ivy, a few weeks back, she emailed, and even on the air, we were talking about Destiny, a black female guest who was on the program. Like, so much content at this point. We've done well over 1,500 programs and guests and people from all over the world. Like, I myself forget, some of the content that we have produced. But Mr. McNair, definitely memorable. It had been a while since I had heard the program, and to be able to go back and listen in terms of who Walt Whitman is and why that name immediately signified so much, and why I said, oh, wow, this is going to be a great class today, because I'm going to speak up about white supremacy racism as soon as we get to the portion of the chapter, just because I remember the Black self-respect of Mr. Timothy McNair. This episode is in the archives of the C.O.W.S. It's at iTunes. You can download it. I'll put it back up at Black Talk Radio Network as well, and get it at SoundCloud. But Mr. McNair gave a lot, and I mean a lot, of great information. He publicly identifies as quote unquote gay. We talked about that before we even got to Walt Whitman, and specifically asked him if he had been abused, maligned by other Black people because he identifies as gay. And he spent about 15 minutes giving classic response to the question. Just for context of white supremacy, 1 decade. At any rate, Mr. McNair, as you heard in the audio segment, did not want to recite Walt Whitman's content because he is informed and knows Walt Whitman is a white supremacist. That's not debatable. That's going from his own testimony, and he left volumes of commentary about Black people, and said, I have enough Black self-respect that even though I'm on a scholarship, even though I'm in grad school and I am a brilliant scholar, I am not going to sacrifice my Black self-respect to allow myself to sing a song or a poem by some white supremacist. This is from June 3, 2013. Context of White Supremacy. Victim of white supremacy, Mr. Timothy McNair, talking about Walt Whitman, why he would not recite his poem, Context of White Supremacy.
I will share a bit more just to add to the perspective. You heard Langston Hughes' perspective. He is a victim of racism, so he can say whatever he wishes. This is just adding information to what we already have. This is from a different biography on Whitman, and there are tons. White people have devoted a lot of time to discussing and dissecting his work and his view on Black people, because he wrote a lot. He wrote a lot about Black people and slavery. He was alive during the Civil War, so, it was a time where a lot of people were writing and talking about racism, Black people. So this is from The Better Angel, Walt Whitman in the Civil War. Read a little bit just to add perspective. Talking about, since Langston Hughes accurately said that Mr. Whitman did spend some time around Black people when he was growing up. From the book, one of his closest companions as a youth was a freed slave named Old Mose, who was the living embodiment of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom. He was a very genial, correct, manly, and acute, Whitman recalled, and a great friend of my childhood. When the family moved to Brooklyn, Whitman mingled freely with Blacks who made up 10% of the borough's population and were even poorer, if that was possible, than the Whitmans and their working-class neighbors. Although Whitman would later salute the, this is in quotes, the dim-descended, Black, divine-souled African, large, fine-headed, nobly formed, superbly destined, on equal terms with me, end quote, he was rather less welcoming to the African Americans of his own country, this is in quotes, who believes that whites and Blacks can ever amalgamate in America, end quote, he asked in an editorial written for the Brooklyn Daily Times in May 1858, end quotes again, or who wishes it to happen. Nature has set an impassable seal against it. Besides, is it not America for the whites? And is it not better so? End quote. He would put the matter even more crudely in an aside to Horace Trebell 30 years later. That is one reason, this is all in quotes, that is one reason why I never went full on the nigger question, he said. The nigger question would not turn, would not do anything for himself. He would only act when prompted to act. No, I should not like to see the nigger in the saddle. It seems unnatural. End quote. Given such views, it is not surprising that Whitman's erstwhile publisher, Charles Eldridge, would later observe, "I never knew him to have a friend among the Negroes while he was in Washington. Of the Negro race he had a poor opinion. He said that there was in the constitution of the Negro's mind an irredeemable, trifling, or volatile element, and he would never amount to much in the scale of civilization." Now, I could read a whole lot more of these. This just goes on and on about him calling black people niggers and, all the standard things you would associate with someone who is a racist. Given that there are a lot of white people that you could track down who had similar thoughts, 1800s or even 2013, why is this such a big deal? Like I said in the email that I sent you, George Washington owned slaves. I'm sure you have had or do have right now a dollar bill in your pocket. You're not protesting dollar bills. Why is this such a big deal that you can't recite one measly poem by Walt Whitman that does not have anything to do with black people? He's not calling us niggers or anything else. One measly poem. Why is this such a big deal?
Thank you for that question. That's at the helm of what I really want to discuss as well. It's simple. I was talking about there were things that mirrored the controversy of, a person from the oppressed group that Whitman, African Americans, that he spoke about talking in favor of him, Nelson Hughes. Then there was, of course, so my mirror to that, it was what I said earlier about Jews who actually are not opposed to having Richard Wagner's works being performed in Israel, which they performed twice, but that it's still banned to a big extent. But it's a controversy. The point of the matter for me with Walt Whitman comes from the following. I've had colleagues who are Jewish saying, I have to perform Wagner. Well, first of all, you don't have to perform anything, do anything that you don't want to do. Let's just get that out. My grandfather says you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. There are ramifications. You don't have to do anything you want to do. Secondly, visibility is a big issue in this. We know what Richard Wagner thought of Jews because, whose Hitler play throughout the entire Holocaust in concentration camps? Whose writings are well published with anti-Semite sentiment that have been researched in depth with dissertation and books and beyond. Now, on the other side, how many people have I met, even those who are in support of me, the hundreds and thousands who are in support of me that I'm so grateful to, who said, we didn't know this about Walt Whitman, or maybe they didn't know who Walt Whitman was at first, but if they did know of him, they didn't know this detail of him. So, if we're going to perform something by somebody, and the song is titled A Song for Democracy, and first of all, our country's not really democracy, so I wish we'd get out of really saying that, but A Song for Democracy, it's labeled, and it's, with poetry by Walt Whitman, I cannot stand as a man of color and perform this work by this man when I know that the piece was written for an all-white high school at that time. Obviously, it was not integrated. Obviously, desegregation had not begun at that time. And when we know that in the poem, even though it's not racist, there are still imperialist, a lot of hegemony in the actual poetic setting, where it's discussing we are going to sell our ship and Asia is by thy side, America, and over the waters, this whole thing of we're expanding and expansion and all of that stuff, which helped to create Native American tragedies that we have in our very eyes today. It is a big deal because of all of that, because I find a problem with the fact that we seek to exonerate someone of things that they did by either saying they were a man of their time, which is just a horrible, lame excuse, or by saying, well, they were an amazing poet and they wrote great things. Well, that's great, but he can be an amazing racist poet. Why can't we just put it that way? I'm open to the performance of a Walt Whitman poem if perhaps we would have more books published on Walt Whitman's personal thoughts on African Americans, if we would have a pre-concert series lecture sometime at this quotation mark liberal school, progressive school that barred me from class, if we could have a pre-concert lecture discussing what was the democracy that Walt Whitman was talking about. Because I find it a little insulting that we would say that it was the democracy that we're in right now. And so it is visibility. And when I, as a student of color, say that I will not perform it under this circumstance, to have the disregard of a white professor, and then that he will expect that I would react and perform the piece because there's two other African Americans in the class who have not expressed their views, but who are performing it, is racist. Why would you think that every African American thinks alike if you were not a racist? Why would I have to have the same opinion of Walt Whitman as another African American when there's factual analysis, critical analysis that people have done on this man? That it's sad, but it's more than just a simple Google. You know, we have a scholar here at Northwestern who she herself is a Walt Whitman expert, and she was on the PBS special with 4 other Walt Whitman experts, one of whom was from Columbia, you know, they're from all these quotation mark elite schools. And as much as they were experts in Walt Whitman, they had to do an entire summation admitting, and which was easy for them because they were experts and hopefully they could, that he was a racist. So I'm not sure why it's being debated amongst my music professor who is not studied in anthropology, sociology, African studies, or anything of cultural history of the sorts, to debate whether or not Whitman was a racist or not. I mean, we know that's true.
Truth. Speaking truth. Context of White Supremacy, Mr. Timothy McNair, alumnus, Northwestern University in Illinois, right like a few blocks from the great Pam, Trojan Horse Publications, racismws.com. But he gave a lot of great information on that broadcast back in 2013 and just explaining why he took the stance that he did, how they tried to use other victims who were in the class. Apparently there were other victims of racism who said, you know, they didn't have a problem with Walt Whitman or the recital, and, you know, they didn't know what the big deal was. They tried to use that to try to get some leverage on him to make him participate in this recital. But again, Black self-respect. And this was Mr. McNair, him refusing in this recital. That was how I found out about Walt Whitman's white supremacist views and him talking, you know, nigger this and nigger that, and they're stupid, and we should have never ended the plantation era of white supremacy terrorism. I didn't know all of those details about Whitman until Mr. McNair, to his point that apparently many folks were ignorant about that. And I mean, that's just, you know, getting a better understanding, try to learn a little bit about everything. But because of Mr. McNair, and that happened that was the same year that Breaking Bad was concluding, and as I said, Walt Whitman is integral to the plot of Breaking Bad from season 1 all the way to the end. So all of that happened at the same time. No coincidence. I remembered all of that information from some years ago. As soon as I saw that in the yoga manual, I knew, oh yeah, I'm going to speak up immediately when we get to this section in class. So we get to class. We're going through, this is the 5th chakra, so it takes a while for us to get to this section. In fact, it takes so long. The suspected racist white woman who is leading the teacher training, she left. She had, you know, some appointment or what have you. So we had a non-white instructor, only non-white instructor. He ended up being the person leading this section. So I was a little disappointed about that. I would have much rather, you know, raised this with the white woman as opposed to another victim. But anyway, so we get to the section and he says, so what are some of the postures for the 5th chakra? And I immediately speak up and rattle off about 4 or 5 of the postures, like, oh yeah, we did this morning, and, you know, this is the posture, and boom, 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 rattle them off, and then immediately, and boop, did you know in the manual that they quote Walt Whitman? I read the quote for the 5th chakra, and I say, Walt Whitman, this guy is an acknowledged, openly white supremacist. He made flagrantly anti-black views. He called black people niggers and talked about how it was a terrible thing that slavery ended because black people were so dumb and ignorant. Like, how is this guy in the book for, you know, something that's supposed to be spiritual and you know, everything that this practice is supposed to be about? And so the black female was present for this class, and then it was all racist suspects, everybody else. A few of them gasped, oh my goodness. I don't know if they were gasping because this is new information or if that was a gasp like, oh my God, I can't believe this nigger has disrupted our training, saying nigger and everything else. Anyway, the non-white instructor said, oh my, I didn't know any of that information. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. To pivot from that, back to the postures, and he left Walt Whitman alone completely. I looked down at the manual because I read the Walt Whitman quote, and even when I was preparing for all of this at my residence, I did not look past the Walt Whitman quote to see what was under it. The very next quote after Walt Whitman, he was mastered by the sheer surging of life, the tidal wave of being, the perfect joy of each separate muscle, joint, and sinew, in that it was everything that was not death, that it was aglow and rampant, expressing itself in movement, flying exultantly under the stars. Jack London, The Call of the Wild. In class, literally, I look down. I don't even read the quote. I just look down and see his name in boldface print, Jack London. Non-white instructor is talking after this is like maybe 60 seconds after he says, okay, so we're going to pivot away from that. Nigga talking about white supremacy. Back to these here postures, blah, 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 blah. And I say, oh man, wait a minute. Jack London, this guy's a racist too. He's got a whole history of talking bad about black people. And how did they pick two flagrantly racist whites to have in here in this section? And he's like, oh man, I tried to pivot away and he comes right. And I couldn't believe that either, that I didn't look down to see the other one. And I can even give a pause because I'm sure some of our listeners, it is a shame if we have Bay Area listeners. If you've been to Jack London Square in the Bay Area and you don't know that Jack London is a racist, shame on you. Well, I won't say shame. We're victims of racism. I lived in the Bay Area and I didn't know that Jack London was a racist until I saw the documentary film that came out in 2005 when I was a Bay Area resident, Unforgivable Blackness, The Rise and Fall of Jack Johnson. Excellent film. Ken Burns, he's done a lot of work on racism, white supremacy. He did the most recent documentary on Vietnam. It's like a 10-part series, dealt a lot with white supremacy, racism. His daughter, Sarah Burns, was a guest on the C.O.W.S. Like I said, it's kind of a sly retrospective on the C.O.W.S, but his daughter, Sarah Burns, she was a guest on the program in 2012. We talked about her documentary film on the Central Park 5 cowbell. Anywho, the segment from Unforgivable Blackness, as in terms of how do I know Jack London, racist, white supremacist, we will cue Ken Burns, Unforgivable Blackness, the C.O.W.S.
The fight was set for the day after Christmas, 1908, in Sydney, Australia.
This battle may in the future be looked back upon as the first great battle of an inevitable race war. There is more in this fight to be considered than the pugilistic title of Champion of the World. The Australian Star.
I'll beat this nigger, the champion told the press, or my name isn't Tommy Burns. It wasn't, of course. His real name was Noah Brusso. One Australian sports writer declared that the fight would pit white beauty against black unloveliness. But Australian women flocked to Johnson's training camp just to have a look at him.
How does Burns want it? Does he want it fast and willing? I'm his man in that case. Does he want it flat-footed? Goodness, if he does, why, I'm his man again. Anything to suit, but fast or slow, I'm going to win.
In the evenings, Johnson put on impromptu after-dinner shows at the Sir Joseph Banks Hotel, playing his bass fiddle. Among the newspapermen assigned to the big fight was the celebrity novelist Jack London. He had been a mill worker and a hobo, a convict, a sailor, and a luckless gold miner before becoming a writer. and he was a committed socialist. His solidarity with the working man, however, did not extend to black people.
Personally, I am with Burns all the way. He is a white man, and so am I. Naturally, I want to see the white man win. Put the case to Johnson and ask him if he were the spectator at a fight between a white man and a black man, which he would like to see win. Jack London.
Context of White Supremacy. Mr. London is quoted frequently throughout in that documentary Unforgivable Blackness, the segment that you just heard. They're talking about the fight between Jack Johnson and, I forgot his name, Jim Jeffries. The first fight in 1908 when Tommy Brown, I'm sorry, I mixed there were two mega fights between Jack Johnson. The second big fight was Jack Johnson, Jim Jeffries, another suspected racist. This first fight was Tommy Bruin or whatever they said his last name was. Noah Brewster's his Tommy Burns, Noah Brewster's his real name. That first fight when Jack Johnson became the first black heavyweight champion in 1908. That's what that portion of the film is talking about, where Jack London is quoted as saying that naturally he prefers the white man to win. Naturally, the white man is supposed to be the champion. And that logic, I've said that consistently, whites, they will use those comparisons. Oh, well, if Jack Johnson wants a black person to win, then it's not racist. It's not anything white supremacist about me wanting this. That is folly of the greatest order. And I just want to add, for Jack London, he is like revered. I think Jack London, if you go into like white bookstores, frequently his picture will be one of the ones on the wall, or in school, a lot of times you'll be required to read Jack London's work. There's a hobo. That's a vagrant. I don't want to use any colorful language. We're talking about a vagrant, a transient, a convict. Wow. System of racism, white supremacy. But yeah, I immediately, as soon as I saw that that both of them, the non-white instructor, and I even need to pause after I finish this to give one more anecdote about the non-white instructor, but he says, wow, I didn't know that either. I'll give you the information so that you can contact corporate, because this is in the big corporate manual. This is not something that is a Seattle product. This is the corporate manual, the same corporate decisions who decided that we were going to read Michael Stone's The Inner Tradition of Yoga. This is the suspected racist white male who died from a heroin overdose in 2017, and we're reading his book on spiritual enlightenment through yoga. Breaking Bad, I think. Yeah. Anyway. So I did not get the information yet for corporate, but I intend to request that today. We have teacher training in about an hour, a little over an hour. I intend to request that information today to contact corporate about them having flagrantly racist authors in their manual. The non-white instructor, racially ambiguous instructor, this is the person who I thought was white, but I put an asterisk there, and then I asked him directly, and he said, no, he is not white. When he was giving his racial classification, he said that he gets that a lot. People think of him as being racially ambiguous, and he said, and he, I believe, is gay, kind of what they might call flamboyantly gay. He said, I'll be anything you want, just pay me, and he held out his hand. I thought that is the victim of white supremacy, according to his own testimony, and all of the non-white people that I have asked about this, they all immediately thought he was a non-white person. No one non-white that I have asked has said, oh yeah, I think this guy could be white. Everyone that non-white that I've asked has said, oh yeah, I think he's a non-white person, and I don't know why you think he's, or why you ever thought he was white. Anyway, that attitude, I'll do anything you want, or I'll be anything you want me to be if you, pay me the correct amount. I do not think that that is a correct or healthy attitude for non-white people to have in a system of white supremacy. In fact, I think having that way of thinking will help maintain the system of white supremacy, because racists, they can compensate that. Hey, sometimes they can punish you to help maintain the system of white supremacy. Other times they can just compensate you. No problem. Hey, don't we say that all the time? If you go and snitch on another black person on the job, oh, hey, we might have a promotion for you. We might have a bonus for you. They can compensate you for helping them keep all of the plantation work going. They can do that easily. Compensate you for a lot of things in the system of white supremacy, especially when it comes to Area 8. Oh, yeah. You got that sort of attitude? I'll do anything. Oh, wow. Wow. All of the perversions of white supremacy racism. Continuing, I will let you know when I get the information from corporate, and I will read what I write to them. This didn't end on Sunday. So every week we do they do a recap. This is what we did this past week, and this is what's going to be coming up the next week. This is the homework that you have due, or other assignments, or whatever, So they send out the email. The very first line of the email, before we get to assignments, before we get to anything, the very first line of the email, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Nelson Mandela. I would insert Tacky, trashy, terroristic, the great Neely Fuller Jr., but how many sound clips can one play? They send us these emails every week. They have never had Nelson Mandela quoted at the beginning of any email or any other Negro, to my recollection, at the very beginning of the email. I thought that was a really tacky response. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe they had planned. The white woman sent out this email, by the way. Maybe she had planned to send out Nelson Mandela anyway. I don't think so. And I did hashtag whites do not or don't love Nelson Mandela. I feel like he is one of the most commonly violated, deceased victims of white supremacy that whites will use. Martin Luther King is pretty high up there too. Rosa Parks, another victim, pretty high up there. They will invoke. Sometimes it's, I have black friends. Sometimes I have a black child. I have a black boyfriend, black girlfriend. Let me give you a quote from the great Nelson Mandela. That is one Negro that I really admire. They have a lot of different ways of trying to give the veneer that they are not racist, and most of them are tacky and trifling at best. At best. Walt Whitman said that there was something trifling about the Negro's spirit. That was, anyway. Nelson Mandela quoted at the beginning of the email. I did ask the black female if she thought that was a coincidence or if that was in any way related to white supremacy being invoked at the training session the day before. I'll report back what her response is. Speaking of black female who's in teacher training with Gus T, we talked about our different experiences. We had a huge laugh about Michael Stone and his heroin overdose. This is the white guy who wrote the book we're required to read because we didn't know that information, either of us. Us seeing that this was a white guy was enough for both of us to say, oh, I don't want to purchase this book. I don't even want to read this material. I'm totally uninterested. Like, that was enough for both of us. Finding out that this is a heroin addict who overdosed, like, oh my God. Anyway, so after we had our big giggle about all of that, she missed like 2 lectures we have 3 lectures a week. She missed 2 last week, which is, substantial. That's 6 hours of class time. And she was like, yeah, I went to my OMI. If you remember, I said before, in this whole tacky affair, we don't have homies, we have OMIs, and this is the person that you're supposed to go talk to if you miss a class, and they'll hook you up and give you notes and all that. So she goes to her suspected racist OMI who had previously ignored her when she spoke to him on the way to class, like literally about 20 yards from the yoga studio. And he says, oh yeah, all of the information that we covered from that class, it's in the manual, so you can just, read that on your own and you'll be good to go. And I say, wow, that's interesting, because the lecture that we were talking about was covering the pregnancy modifications, which was fascinating. Covering the pregnancy modifications, and none of that information is in the manual that we have. All of that was new information. And in fact, I requested the PowerPoint because of that fact, because none of that information was in the manual. So she was just like, wow, that is so tacky, and that would have totally messed me up because I'm thinking all of that information is there. And anyway, so the moral on that one, I guess, if you are a student or in any other situation, work situation, whatever it is, where you might be dependent on a white person to relay information to you, you might want to double check and verify that you have gotten all the information, that you've gotten accurate information, because I am sure that that has got to be a standard tactic in any sort of arrangement where a black person is dependent upon a white person for information. That there's going to be some sort of, and in my view, that's just deliberate sabotage. Because I mean, he didn't have to do anything. All he could have done is say, "Oh, I didn't take any notes, but there's supposed to be a PowerPoint. Maybe you can email the instructor about getting that." That would have been it. He could have done that in 30 seconds and it would not have required any effort at all. The fact that he wasn't even able to do that, and much less lied, and this is supposed to be someone who is in training for yoga instruction. That's why I've said, like, I'm just all of the spiritual aspect about the practice of yoga that I am sure is probably there, I am not interested in, because it's in an environment saturated by white supremacy. And I don't know how that would be the case to remove that from any yoga environment. Even if you took all the white people out, I don't know if that would do it successfully. But I do know the environments that I have been in, it is there in a very flagrant manner. And that's why I'm just like, come on, man. Like, I'm supposed to chant. I don't do any of the ohms. I don't do the namaste. I don't do any of the chanting. None of that. Like, are you serious? I'm supposed to pretend, while we sit here and chant and what have you, and we can leave this classroom and you won't even acknowledge my existence, but I'm supposed to act like there's some sort of spiritual connection between the two of us, the light in me. See, get out of here, man. But get back to these postures. Let's do what we got to do, and then we will go our separate ways, man. Like, that's been a lot of my attitude. I am sure I could have got a lot more out of this experience if it had not been for the system of racism, white supremacy, but that is the world in which we live. Anyway, with that, if folks have any thoughts, questions, commentary, the number 641-715-3640, the code 564-943#. Press *61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press *61 if you would like to participate. I will check the switchboard. Reading is more important than watching television. The great Dr. Welsing. Jack Johnson, black boxer at the early 20th century. He's often compared to, or Muhammad Ali is often compared to him. Donald Trump, President Donald J. Trump just pardoned him cowbell for Jack Johnson. They prosecuted him with the Mann Act and sleeping with a wife. Anyway, all of that is covered in Unforgivable Blackness, which is a phenomenal documentary. You heard Samuel L. Jackson does the audio, and they read a lot from Jack Johnson's autobiography, and so they have Samuel L. Jackson do the voiceover for Jack Johnson. It is amazing. I would highly recommend folks check it out. It's about 3 hours, maybe a little more than 3 hours, but it's worth it. The whole thing is about white supremacy, racism. How could it be anything other than that? Unforgivable Blackness as the title. It's about James Earl Jones is in it. If you hear the broadcast on Timothy McNair, he says that many people, including Gus T, think he sounds similar to James Earl Jones, the great. And James Earl Jones is in the documentary on Jack Johnson, Unforgivable blackness. And interestingly, he has a segment, James Earl Jones, where he says he's talking about Mr. Johnson, and he says that he wanted to be a man, he wanted to be a whole man and be present. And he says that the story of Jack Johnson, it's not about race, it's about power. Now, the name of this documentary is Unforgivable Blackness. James Earl Jones, VGQ, Roots, his body of work, massive. However, I feel like that sort of thing happens regularly, where we are trying to, or we should be trying to honestly as we can, speak about and address the issue of white supremacy, racism, and somehow it just keeps getting obfuscated, moved to the side. It's not racism, it's something else, it's power, it's about money, all these other things. No, it doesn't matter the context, whether it's the yoga studio, the boxing ring, the White House, whatever the issue happens to be, the system of racism, white supremacy, stand your ground, the old one or the new one. System of racism, white supremacy, that is what dominates everything. And the moment that you start moving away from that, minimizing that, acting like that is not the case, you are stepping off into total chaos. Number again, 641-715-3640. The code 564943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Wish list at Amazon.com under Gus T Renegade. Barcoon, I think it should be the top item. Make sure I have that for Friday. Either way, that is our new book. Barcoon, Zora Neale Hurston. I am super excited. We'll see if folks have any questions, thoughts, if I have been confusing or unclear about anything in the presentation. Let's see. Retired firefighter, did you have a question, call, commentary? Retired firefighter, did you have a question? You should be with us, or are you just listening? I'm not hearing. If you are with us, retired firefighter, I am not hearing you. I thought you had a hand up, but I'm not hearing anything on your line. If you are just listening, that is fine as well. If other folks, if you have a question, gripe, comment, feel free. We should be here for Workplace Racism, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Tomorrow, Barcoon, Zora Neale Hurston's work. That's Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Still have teacher training, which is why we're a little early for Friday, but 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and the compensatory call-in Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Pacific. We'll catch up on what has transpired over the last week or so. Anywho, with the teacher training, with all of the nonsense that Gus has had to endure in a variety of ways, I would still say it's been mostly constructive. I mean, racism is going to be there regardless of what you attempt to do. If racism is enough to stop you from participating in an activity, then you're probably not going to be able to do much of anything until the system of white supremacy has been replaced. So yeah, I don't think you'd be able to do much of anything, whether it's constructive or not. So I think it has been constructive, and I think just having a code, just having an understanding that we are in a system of racism has been very, very helpful in many situations, even days where I feel like I could have made improvements to the code or whatever. One of the things that I will say that I've been most pleased about, I had a listener who asked about in terms of like spacing and the spot that you pick in class and trying to minimize the likelihood of being kicked assaulted, any other way violated in class. And I told that person, number one, I try to avoid classes at the most crowded time. I generally don't take those classes. Most yoga studios, you can just do a search online and you should see like they'll have information that shows like the peak hours. And I just try to not take the classes at the peak hours, especially if you take morning classes. Generally, it's not super crowded in the morning. So that's one thing that I do. And then I told that person that I try to take the corner position. If you take a spot on the corner, front corner, rear corner, those spots minimize how many people can be close to you. If you're in a corner location, then it automatically removes 2 spots from being able to be directly next to you. And the studio that I practice at privately, their studio has an irregular configuration. The room is not a square. So they have a formation where you can kind of be really isolated. Like if you get a spot in the front row, you can kind of be where you're not really next to anybody. And that is like my regular spot, like the top right corner where I'm not next to any, like I am known for being in that location every class, like students and instructors, like bam, same predictable spot. And what happens, I'm in that spot every time. Not only people know that that's where I am at, I am out of range of most people. Like there's no way we could have physical contact. If they stumble or anything happens like that, not going to have any sort of physical contact with anybody else. And something that I didn't really recognize until much later, being in that position, it takes me out of eye gaze, which is substantial. We're talking system of racism, white supremacy, where you've had black people who were killed for what they call reckless eyeballing. And I have had non-white people, males, particularly in the era of Me Too, where they have said, man, I was in a yoga class and I was in a position where I felt like I just had a female's derriere in my face for most of the class. And I just didn't feel comfortable. And I said, location, you pick spots, especially if you can pick a spot on the front row. Nobody is in front of you. And I love my special location. Nobody is around me, period. Nobody is in my eye gaze. So there's never an accusation, oh my gosh, he was leering at me and he had those bricks and everything. Never. My eye gaze, I'm looking at the wall or whatever they have on the poster right there. I can look out the window, the door, like phenomenal. Position of where you're placed in class can be very, very helpful. Let me check again. Retired firefighter, did you have commentary? I'm just checking to make sure I didn't miss out. We're not having an issue with the line. I saw your hand up. Line should be open. Did you have commentary? You're just listening, sir? We will assume he is listening for now. If other folks, if you have comment, question, you should get a hand up in the next 10 minutes or so. I do have teacher training, so we will not be hanging out super, super long, but I did want to give an update. I felt like some of the report might take up a bit too much time to talk about on workplace racism, although it definitely would have qualified, in my view, something that happened directly in teacher training. I guess I would also take this moment to make sure to emphasize, I do think Black self-respect is significant. I said, I think at the very beginning, obviously, this is not working a 40-hour job where, this is how you are able to make sure that your rent is paid at the end of the month or your mortgage or whatever it is, that your children, offspring have the resources that they need. It is not that. However, I do think that I remember Mr. Edward Williams, founder of Counter-Racism, him saying that you don't just get this information about the system of racism, white supremacy, and counter-racist concepts. You don't just get this information to have. You want to make an effort to apply these concepts, this information. And I think it is important. Obviously, every opportunity that presents itself is not going to be the best time for you to engage in your counter-racist efforts. Sometimes it is good to remain silent, observe, witness, even if it is an act of racism, white supremacy. Sometimes you don't do anything or you don't say anything. You just witness, you catalog that did happen. I also think it's important for us to make an effort to make sure that we are not being spectators, to apply counter-racist concepts and even finding environments where we can practice our counter-racist concepts, behaviors. If that means asking questions, if that means calling out racist white supremacist behavior, if that means questioning whites, whatever, whatever that involves, making sure that we are engaging in that activity on a regular basis, and refining. Like, I was curious about that, if folks had any thoughts on what is, or if there is a even better way to go about, if you have a Walt Whitman referenced in the manual, a Jack London referenced in the manual. Is there a better counter-racist method for addressing that in a teaching situation? I'd be interested in that as well. But I just think it's important to make that effort to not just recognize, oh, that something racist happened. When you become more informed and you start having information, I know it can be intimidating. That is, white terrorism is supposed to be intimidating in a variety of ways. But we should, I think, Timothy McNair, as I said, we should make an effort to exercise some Black self-respect. If we recognize and observe we got correct information about the system of white supremacy, what it means to be white, we should be making an effort to apply that information, our understanding, often, I'll say. Often. I think that's helping towards getting this problem solved. Let me see. I'm going to make sure.
He is a graduate student of opera.
Just double checking to make sure my audio is correct. Did any folks have questions they wanted to make sure they get in? Question, comment, anything didn't make sense? Just double checking. Give another maybe 4 minutes or so. Folks have a question. If not, I will get ready for teacher training and see. In fact, I will inquire about the Nelson Mandela, but the most important bit of information I want is the corporate contact information, so then I can go about getting my letter written to relay my concerns, my report of how incorrect it is for them. Hypocritical. I'm going to have to make sure that I invoke that word. How hypocritical it is for them to have just flagrant white supremacists in the text. And this is not one of those where I feel like, oh, they should, just leave it in to be clear about what all this is about. I think that's the case regardless. But yeah, these guys, I think it would be better if they were not in the text. Let's see. Retired firefighter, I think he is just listening. Don't see any other hands. We'll give it a second or so. Folks are content listening in. Hope folks are being constructive with their time and energy. I will make sure I take time. I'm probably going to say something about this on the compensatory call-in as well. I did not watch the special on Trayvon Martin. No intention. I tweeted the report that I wrote about Black Death being televised. This has been a growing pattern, in my opinion, of just making entertainment out of Black Death. They had the Khalif Browder series, which was mightily depressing. And Trayvon Martin, they had the one on Jordan Davis. It's international, overseas. They had they've had a number of documentaries on Stephen Lawrence. And I'm not saying that they don't have quality information, but I am saying that the overall pattern of just consistently making a big cinematic production out of Black people who've been killed by whites in a system of racism, white supremacy, something about that seems necrophilic and really damaging to Black mental health, where that just becomes a steady diet of consumption. Like, let's get our popcorn and go to Netflix and, see the latest snuff flick of who got killed and, how the police didn't properly investigate what happened and the attorneys botched the trial and messed up the evidence or whatever else is going on. And to just keep seeing that played out over and over and over. I'm sure they're going to have a documentary on Sandra Bland and some of these other prominent cases. I could see where some people say that, this, I guess, informs the public about these cases, or maybe will lead people to becoming less confused about the system of white supremacy. That is not my perception, my view at all. I think they have enough whites involved in these projects that it easily, for a non-white person who is confused about racism, white supremacy, they will not get an accurate understanding of white supremacy, racism, what it means, how it works. I seriously doubt that they gave a definition of racism in the documentary on Trayvon Martin. I could be in error. I'd be willing to put some coins down to make a wager about whether or not they included a definition of white supremacy, racism, and how that helps you understand what happened in the Trayvon Martin case. If I am in error, I will acknowledge so loudly the next time I broadcast. If anyone here can set me straight and say, hey, I watched it yesterday, it was fabulous, they had great information, and they did have a definition of white supremacy, racism in the film, then, as I said, set me straight, and we'll correct that right now. Don't see any hand. Maybe that means some people didn't watch it. That's great, too. But as I said, if I am in error, let me know, and I will correct myself on air emphatically, without shame, as soon as I find out. With that, I will assume folks are grand. Man, oh man, I will let you know the fallout from corporate. If anything comes up in class today, I will get another opinion, because I could have been in error. They might have had no reason of including Nelson Mandela in the email, or maybe that had nothing to do at all with me speaking up in class about white supremacy. I'll see what the black female says, because she was present in class. I'll let you know her thoughts on that, or if anything else pops up related to racism. If you all have thoughts, folks that listen in the archives, if you have thoughts, comments, questions, or if you have a response to any of the questions that were posed, any changes that have taken place since I began my little yoga journey at the beginning of the year, feel free, untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. Much obliged for folks tuning in. I hope you all are taking advantage of the warm summer weather. Be codified, have fun. Race soldiers, they do not take breaks just because the weather is nice. Remain codified even if you are out and about having a blast at the beach or whatever you're doing. I would again submit sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. Let's do everything we can to keep our brain computers functioning optimally, so that we can make phenomenal decisions in an environment that is extraordinarily dangerous, especially for individuals classified as black. Also, before I get to my buckle up, I would encourage, again, be mindful about binging on the commentary. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Trayvon Martin story comes out at the same time that there's another Stand Your Ground case in Florida, no less, that has gained national attention. I would be mindful about binge watching that material, because I don't think it's healthy. I think particularly for black people. And the study, there's research, I forgot, we just played that segment, that it is not healthy to just continue and watch and to foment on that and be depressed. I'm not saying to ignore it. I'm not saying to act like it's not present. If you want to support the family, that's great. But just reading and watching that material and bemoaning that, in my view, it is not understanding the system of white supremacy and why these events happen. That's why I said, did they have a definition of racism in that Trayvon Martin film? I didn't watch that. I don't want to see it. And again, I would not sit around and watch that footage of the shooting that took place outside that convenience store and watching every angle and trying to analyze all of his movements. Race soldier. Whites kill black. Mr. Nero, whites kill for fun. What does it mean to be white? Just fundamentals about why these things happen. It doesn't mean that I'm not upset about it or that it's not an act of white terrorism. You recognize it as such, and it changes how you respond, so that you're not constantly just having your emotions pulled this way and that way and just being exhausted and fatigued. And in my opinion, It is put in a state of disease. It is not healthy, and it is done deliberately with these cases and even with these films, making all of these projects where, again, every aspect of how we focus on Black people is through Black death. Dr. Curry talked about this as well. Off my soapbox, buckle up in addition to being sober if you're in a vehicle, driver, or passenger. Let's do everything we can to minimize contact with race soldiers, badge or no. That's it. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other Black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of Black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another Black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Man, I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.